The sun was too bright for a funeral, too warm for grief. But I remember thinking, maybe that was his final joke. He hated gray days, said sorrow deserved sunlight so we could all see things clearly. And then she said it. She doesn't belong here. Let's not pretend we were ever family. Her voice cut through the silence like broken glass on tile. It came from Meredith, my late husband's daughter. Her tone was crisp, rehearsed, like she'd been waiting for this stage. She stood at the edge of the casket, one black glove tugging at her elbow, her lips curled into the kind of smirk people mistake for grace. We were at his funeral. The priest was still flipping pages of scripture. The casket hadn't even been lowered. And yet, she chose that moment to aim straight for my chest. "She's not even legally his wife," Meredith continued, louder now, her eyes scanning the crowd for approval. "Everyone knows she latched onto him when he got sick. It's pathetic, really." People shifted in their seats. But no one said anything, not his colleagues from the law firm, not his sister-in-law, who once gave me a scarf for Christmas, not even the man in the third row who used to call me kiddo while pouring scotch in my kitchen. I felt their silence like 1,000 tiny betrayals. I was sitting in the second row, not the first, because Meredith insisted on immediate family only up front. I hadn't protested. I was too tired to argue that day. But now, as she stood there declaring her version of truth, I realized I wasn't tired. I was done. Still, I said nothing. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just turned to my son, our son, and found him already watching me. 17, quiet, with my husband's eyes and my father's stubborn jaw. And then Meredith jabbed the final insult in. She was just a nurse with a marriage certificate, not a wife. Let's not act like she mattered. The word mattered hung in the air. Heavy. Disgusting. That was when my son stood. No warning. Just a soft rustle of his suit jacket as he rose to his feet. The crowd's attention shifted, murmurs rising like smoke. He walked past me, down the center aisle, straight to the casket. His hand reached into the side pocket of my purse. He pulled out the box, small, walnut wood, the last thing my husband ever gave me, addressed in his handwriting, for when the truth matters most. My son turned to face Meredith. Calmly. Without raising his voice, he said, "You're right. She doesn't belong up front." Her smile returned, smug. "But neither do you." The room went still. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. He placed the box gently atop the casket, then turned toward the pews, voice steady and sharp. My father loved 3 things: justice, music, and telling the truth when it was hard. This box? It's his voice, now that he's gone. And I think it's time you all heard it. I looked at him, my boy, and something in me cracked wide open, not from pain, from pride, because she thought she'd buried him and erased me, but she forgot. He left something behind, and she was about to open it. I remember the first time I met Meredith. She was 10, maybe 11, standing behind her father's legs like I was some stranger invading her story. Her eyes were cold even then, not fearful, just guarded. I brought her a tiny music box with a ballerina that twirled when it played. She barely looked at it. Still I stayed. Not for her, for him, because he was unlike any man I'd ever known. Steady, kind, with a quiet strength that didn't try to fill the room. He asked questions and actually waited for answers. We met when he came in for outpatient physical therapy after a surgery. I was his nurse. He was grieving a divorce and a father lost to cancer. I was rebuilding after a broken engagement and a childhood that never truly felt like home. Somehow, between small talks and scheduled appointments, something real began. When he asked me out, I hesitated. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want to be part of another woman's pain. But he looked me in the eye and said, "We've both been hurt, but I want to build something gentle with you." And so we did. For years it was quiet but whole. We didn't rush. Meredith spent every other weekend at his house, and I never tried to take her mother's place. I let her come to me when she was ready. Sometimes she did. I helped her with school projects, cheered at her softball games. One summer she gave me a friendship bracelet she'd made at camp. I kept it in my jewelry box for years. But something shifted when her mother remarried a corporate executive. Suddenly, the weekend drop-offs were filled with comparisons. She'd scoff at our modest home, roll her eyes at our second-hand books and grocery list dinners. At Mom's, we have steak on Thursdays, she'd sneer. Or worse, she'd whisper it just loud enough for me to hear. Dad could have done better. I never told him. He loved her too much. And I didn't want to be the wedge. Still, the distance grew. We got married 5 years after we met. A courthouse wedding. Simple, just us, and 2 friends as witnesses. Meredith didn't come. Said she had a recital. But I saw the pictures her mother posted the same day. Meredith in a white dress, cake in hand, smiling beside her new stepdad. When I got pregnant, he was overjoyed. Nervous, but thrilled. He called the baby a second chance. Meredith didn't speak to him for weeks. When she finally came around, she said only one thing. "So now you'll have a real family." The words shattered something in him. He didn't say much that night, just held me closer. I could feel the apology he couldn't say. Our son was born on a cloudy Thursday. Meredith came to the hospital with her mother. She held him for a moment, stiff arms, quick glance, and then handed him back without a word. When she left, I caught her mother's smirk. That was the last time I saw them together in peace. Years passed. We built a life that was quiet, full of routines and worn-in comforts. My husband worked less, read more. We planted tulips every March and watched movies every Friday. We weren't rich, but we were safe. Until the diagnosis came. Pancreatic cancer. Fast. Brutal. Unforgiving. He made me promise not to let it define him. "Let me live while I still can," he whispered. And we did. We took road trips. We ate too much pie. We let our son skip school to spend more time with him. But Meredith? She returned only after the second hospital stay. And she returned angry, accusatory. She asked about the house, the accounts. She whispered to nurses, asked for papers. She began suggesting that I was influencing him, controlling him. He never confronted her. He just asked me one night if I was okay. And I lied. I said yes. But I wasn't. She made me feel like a thief in my own life. And yet, he never changed toward me. His love stayed the same. In his last days, he would trace my palm with his fingers, as if memorizing it. He'd whisper, "You made all this bearable." When he passed, I found the box on his nightstand. The one he carved himself, small, rich walnut, his handwriting on top, for when the truth matters most. He didn't say what was inside, but he told me once, long before he got sick, "People will rewrite your place in their stories the moment I'm gone. So I'll leave something they can't argue with." I kept the box close. Not out of revenge, but remembrance. I didn't even plan to bring it to the funeral. But something in me, call it instinct, or maybe a whisper of him, told me to put it in my bag. That morning, I brushed my hair like it was just another Sunday. I put on the navy dress he always said made me look like peace in motion. I didn't wear black, not for them. At the chapel, I sat in the second row. Meredith had claimed the front, said it was for true family. And I let her. I watched her give the eulogy. Not a tear, not a crack in her voice, just polished words about legacy and strength. But when she saw me during the final prayer, her eyes narrowed, and I knew, whatever grief she had, it wasn't for the man we both loved. It was for the version of him she thought she owned. And even then, somewhere in me, a small, foolish part still hoped she would speak to me as a daughter. Maybe not with love, but with grace. I was wrong, but I wasn't broken. Not yet. The chapel smelled like lilies and old varnish. Outside, the sun blazed as if daring anyone to mourn properly in the heat. Inside, the air stood still, heavy, thick, filled with words unsaid. I remember clutching the strap of my purse too tightly, the box inside pressing into my hip like a secret I wasn't sure I had the right to carry. They'd already started placing framed photos on easels. Most of them were of Meredith and her father. Beach vacations, school graduations, some corporate gala where he wore a tux and she beamed beside him. Not a single photo of our son, not even the one he kept on his desk, the two of them building a treehouse with sawdust in their hair. I didn't say a word, just sat where Meredith told me to, second row, left side. Immediate family only in the front, she'd said with a smile so tight it could slice glass. People greeted her with sympathy and grace. They patted her shoulder, whispered condolences, asked how she was holding up. She nodded, gave quiet, poised answers, thanked them with the kind of smile that suggests she'd already made peace with the loss. When people saw me, their expressions shifted. Some offered polite nods. A few avoided eye contact. No one sat beside me. My son leaned against the far wall, away from everyone. He refused to sit up front. Said nothing when Meredith offered him a seat next to her. Just looked at me and shook his head. The ceremony began. The priest spoke about character, about service, about legacy. He read Psalm 23, though my husband always said he preferred music to scripture. I caught Meredith eyeing the priest's robe like she'd planned the order of service herself. And maybe she had. Then came the open floor. Anyone wishing to share a memory, the priest said. Now would be the time. I waited. No one stood. Then a woman in a red linen dress, someone I didn't recognize, rose to her feet. I wasn't going to say anything, she began, her voice thick with practiced sorrow. But I think it's important to remember who he was before he got sick. Before he was surrounded by people who changed him. My stomach clenched. She continued. He was sharp, candid, a man of principles. And I know, because he told me, that he worried about how he'd be remembered, about whether his true family would keep his story alive. Meredith lowered her eyes, feigning humility. The woman placed a hand on her shoulder. You were always his anchor. There it was, a narrative being written in real time. And I was being edited out. I stayed silent. Then came the final blow. An older man, gray hair, expensive suit, stood up from the center pew. He was one of my husband's old law partners. Used to send us Christmas cards signed by his secretary. I just want to say, he said, how impressed I am by how Meredith has handled this, with such dignity, despite everything. He turned his head just slightly in my direction. The implication was clear. I was the everything. My breath caught, not from anger, from how quietly cruel it was, how intentional. The same man who once told me over bourbon, he was never the same after meeting you, now looked through me like I was a rumor best ignored. Still, I didn't move. I didn't cry. My son did, though. I saw it. One tear trailing down his cheek before he quickly wiped it away with his sleeve. The final eulogy was Meredith's. She stepped forward, her heels soft against the carpet, her notes printed in bold serif font. She talked about childhood memories, about how he taught her to ride a bike and balance a checkbook. She mentioned her college graduation and the time he brought her chicken soup when she was sick during finals. She never once said my name. She never once mentioned her half-brother. She ended with this. He taught me how to spot manipulation, how to recognize people who smile with their mouths but lie with their presence. Her eyes landed on me for just a breath. Enough for everyone to follow. A few people turned. One woman tilted her head with concern. Another gave a sympathetic glance. To Meredith. I looked down. My hands were trembling. And that's when Meredith walked to the casket, slowly, deliberately, like she was approaching a stage. She placed her hand on it, bowed her head, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then she turned, right in front of everyone, and said, "Some people use marriage to gain access, but love can't be notarized. It's either there or it's not." People murmured. Someone cleared their throat. I heard the shuffle of shoes. Someone left. Still, I didn't move. I closed my eyes and breathed, in, out, because I wasn't going to give her what she wanted. I wasn't going to fall apart in front of people who had already decided I didn't belong. When I opened my eyes, I found my son looking at me. He didn't say a word, but I knew that look. I'd seen it once when he was 6 and a classmate shoved him on the playground. He'd come home with a scraped knee, fists clenched, and said, "It's not fair." I told him sometimes we can't stop people from being cruel, but we can choose not to carry their cruelty inside us. He remembered, because now at 17, he was giving me the same look, like he was the one holding me together. Then he did something unexpected. He stepped into the aisle, not with anger, not with fury, just quiet certainty. He reached into my bag, took the box, and walked toward the casket. The air shifted, chairs creaked, heads turned. He set the box on top of the wood, next to Meredith's perfect white lilies. And then he looked at her, not with hate, with truth, and the room held its breath. For a moment, no one moved. The box sat on top of the casket like it had always belonged there, like it had been waiting for this exact moment, for this exact silence. My son stood beside it, tall and calm, though his hands trembled just slightly. Enough that only I would notice. His fingers brushed over the wood, tracing the small gold plate on top. My husband's handwriting, engraved from the note he left inside the envelope. For when the truth matters most. Meredith finally stepped forward. Her heels clacked louder than necessary, her expression unreadable but her eyes sharp, too sharp to be mourning. "What is this?" she asked, a little laugh tucked behind her words like she didn't take it seriously. "Some kind of show?" My son didn't flinch. "It's from my father," he said, his voice clear and level. "He asked my mom to keep it until the day came." Meredith's eyes flicked to me, then back to the box. "There's no way that's real. He never mentioned any box." "Because it wasn't for you," my son replied. Gasps, soft, polite, almost embarrassed, floated through the crowd. Someone in the back muttered, "Let the boy speak." That's when he opened it. The latch clicked. Just a soft sound, but in that room it echoed like a verdict. The lid lifted, revealing a bundle of folded letters, a flash drive, and a small black recorder. Everything was carefully arranged, almost ritualistic. My son picked up the recorder first. "He made this a month before he died," he said. "He didn't want it played until after the funeral. He didn't trust the noise that would come before it." He looked right at Meredith, and then he pressed play. At first, all you could hear was breathing. Then a cough. Then, "If you're hearing this, I'm gone. And I'm sorry I had to leave this way." It was his voice. The real voice. Not the version edited by eulogies and half-truths. People sat straighter. Even the priest stopped mid-sentence, hands still resting on his Bible. "I want to speak clearly before illness makes my thoughts too muddy. There's been too much silence in my life. I won't let it follow me into death." My heart pressed against my ribs. "To my daughter Meredith, I love you. I do. But I've watched you twist things, especially after I got sick. You convinced yourself that loving me meant controlling me, that protecting me meant isolating me from my wife, from my son, from people who knew me better than you allowed." Meredith's jaw tightened. She whispered something, maybe a protest, but no one was listening. "To anyone who ever questioned my marriage, I chose her. I married her in a courthouse with no prenup, no pressure, no regrets. She held my hand through chemo, stood guard through my worst nights, and never asked for a damn thing in return. Anyone who says different never saw the way she looked at me when I couldn't remember my own name." My chest cracked open. It wasn't grief this time. It was something warmer. "And to my son, God, I hope you're standing there. I hope you never forget that you were the best thing I ever made. And I hope you know, the future I left behind, it's for you. Not because I owe you anything, but because I believe in who you are becoming." My son's eyes brimmed, but he didn't cry. Not yet. The recording continued. "One last thing. There's a flash drive in the box. It has every financial record from the past 2 years, including the withdrawals Meredith made from my accounts while I was on morphine. She said they were for estate planning. They weren't, and I signed nothing. The air vanished. Just gone. Meredith let out a choked laugh, part shock, part panic. That's not... He was drugged, that can't... But she didn't finish, because my son was already holding up the printed ledger. The last page showed $82,000 withdrawn in 3 months, wired directly to a private account in her name, labeled consulting. My son placed the papers gently on the casket. Then he looked at the crowd. "You all treated my mom like she was a mistake," he said, his voice still even. "Like she was some nurse who showed up late in his life. But she was there when you all disappeared. She bathed him when he couldn't move." She watched him forget his passwords, then his words, then her name, and still stayed. A woman in the 3rd row, a former coworker, lowered her gaze. He left her everything, not out of obligation, but because she was his choice. And the next person who calls that pathetic should be ready to explain what they were doing while he was dying. Meredith backed away from the casket, arms stiff at her sides. The room sat still, frozen. My son reached down and picked up the final envelope. It was sealed with a red wax stamp. He handed it to the lawyer seated behind the family row. "I believe that's the official addendum to his will, signed and witnessed by the notary who visited 2 days before he passed." The lawyer nodded. "It's valid." "And it leaves a portion to Meredith," my son added, "because he still loved her, but not the majority, not the house, not the practice." He looked at me, and he made sure my mother wouldn't need to fight anymore. I covered my mouth. Not because I was shocked, but because I had prepared myself for less, for nothing, for being erased. But my husband, he saw everything. My son returned to my side, not triumphant, not smug, just steady. He reached for my hand, and in the quiet that followed, someone started clapping. It wasn't loud, just a slow, hesitant clap from an older woman who once worked as my husband's receptionist. Then another joined in, and another, until the sound filled the chapel with something new. Not applause, exactly, something closer to recognition. I stood slowly. My knees shook, but not from weakness, from release. We didn't say anything else. We didn't need to. My son and I walked out of the chapel, past the pews of silent faces and polite regrets, past Meredith, who stood frozen like someone whose reflection finally told the truth. We didn't look back, because the truth had been spoken, and it echoed louder than any eulogy. The silence after my son's words didn't break. It fractured, like thin glass under a slow, steady weight. It didn't shatter in panic. It split in dignity. People didn't know where to look. Some stared at the box, others at Meredith. A few looked at me, but no one said anything. Not yet. Meredith's hand hovered mid-air as if she'd forgotten what she was about to do. Her smirk, frozen in place, had started to crack around the edges. I could see the panic building behind her eyes, like someone realizing the stage they thought was theirs had just changed into a courtroom, and they were now the defendant. The priest cleared his throat, but didn't speak. My late husband's sister, who had so confidently nodded at Meredith earlier, quietly placed her program down on the pew and stood, murmuring something about fresh air. She didn't return. When my son placed the box on the casket, he didn't open it. He didn't need to. Because the letter on top, his father's handwriting, thick and unmistakable, had one sentence in black ink: "For my wife, my truth, my peace." It was unmistakable, unarguable. Someone in the back whispered, "Wife?" And like that, the ripple began. A cousin leaned over to ask, "Wait, weren't they married for years?" Someone else muttered, "Didn't she take care of him at home the whole time?" Meredith's voice was the only one that tried to cut through it all. Again. He was on medication. He was confused. That doesn't mean anything. But no one responded this time. No one nodded. The box stayed on the casket. We didn't open it right there. That moment wasn't for spectacle. It was for silence, for reckoning. We walked out of the chapel, me and my son, and the sound of our steps felt louder than the organ music behind us. We didn't speak until we got to the car. When we opened the box later that night, we found two things. The first, a notarized letter. Dated 4 months before he passed. My husband's handwriting was firm. His words were sharper than I remembered him being in life. He detailed the full story, how Meredith had tried to isolate him, how she'd pressured him to change his will, how she'd mocked my caretaker's loyalty while taking photos of herself at his bedside for sympathy posts online. He'd seen it all, and he'd said nothing, until now, and he'd left his revised will with it. Sealed, witnessed, legal. It named me, only me, as executor and primary beneficiary, and it named my son as his. The second thing in the box? A single photo. The three of us, me, him, and our boy, on the back porch with coffee mugs and wind in our hair. The caption scribbled in pen, "My real family." I don't know how long I cried, but it wasn't grief, it was release. The aftermath came quickly. When the lawyer read the will, Meredith didn't show. She'd already tried to contest it in whispers to the firm's board. But after my husband's sister backed away, and one of his law partners came forward, admitting that my husband had told him everything a month before he passed, there was nothing left to argue. Her inheritance, reduced to a single symbolic item, the piano she used to bang on as a child. The house, the savings, the firm shares he still held, all of it was mine to manage. My son's college fund secure, the home I'd cared for him in, now truly mine in writing. And yet, what surprised people most wasn't what I kept. It was what I gave back. I sent Meredith a letter, handwritten, not bitter, not angry, just clear. I told her she didn't have to be left with nothing, not because she deserved more, but because my husband once loved her, and I wouldn't let his memory rot between the two of us like an unspoken war. I offered her a share, modest, but fair, enough to live quietly if she chose to. She never responded, but her lawyer did, politely declining the offer, which to me said everything. She couldn't take the money, not now, not from me. Over the next few weeks, the people who'd once kept their eyes down at the funeral started looking for mine. They called, they wrote. Some stopped by with flowers or awkward apologies tucked inside store-bought cakes. One of them, the man who used to call me kiddo while pouring scotch in my kitchen, said softly, "We were wrong. I was wrong. I thought you were temporary." I smiled, small and tired. I wasn't. And I wasn't bitter. I didn't need to be. Because I had something none of them could offer or take away. The truth. And I had my son, who, in one moment of unwavering clarity, gave me back a lifetime of dignity, stolen in glances, whispers, and second-row seats. We started walking together in the mornings, quiet, early walks through the neighborhood. Not because we needed the exercise, but because we needed the stillness. And somewhere in those walks, I realized I wasn't walking behind anyone anymore. Not behind a man, not behind a name, not behind a legacy I had to beg to belong to. I was standing fully in my own story, and the next chapter, it was mine to write. Spring came in quietly that year. Not the kind of spring that bursts through the windows with yellow light and pollen, but the kind that sneaks up on you. Soft rain on old rooftops, birdsong under the sound of boiling tea, and sunlight that warms the floor just enough to make you pause. That's where I found myself, pausing more. There was no more court drama, no more whispers in the hallway, no more pretending I hadn't been broken and rebuilt in front of an entire congregation. My son and I had moved to a quieter part of town, closer to the library, further from memory. The house was smaller, older, but the kind of old that smells like cedar and keeps secrets well. I planted lavender in the front, not because I was trying to start over like people always suggest, but because I finally had space to decide what grew around me. And that was the gift. Not revenge, not applause. Not even the court ruling or the quiet apology from his brother, or the checks that started appearing late and unsigned in the mailbox from people who didn't know what Meredith had done. No, the real gift was being able to sit at my kitchen table each morning, sip my coffee, and not wonder if someone would come in to take it from me. That was peace. my son, now in his senior year, still walks with that same quiet strength that stilled the room that day. He says less than most boys his age, but every word is chosen, carved with care. One evening, as we folded laundry together, still our little ritual since he was 5, he looked at me and said, "I didn't do it for the justice, Mom." I looked up. He didn't need to finish the sentence. "I know," I said. "You did it because you knew I wouldn't." He smiled, not because I was right, but because I finally said it aloud. See, when you survive grief and betrayal, it's easy to believe that silence is strength. That being the bigger person means always turning the other cheek. And maybe sometimes it does, but other times, the real strength is knowing when someone else needs to speak because your silence has said enough. That day at the funeral, I left Meredith something, a check. It was tucked inside the envelope I placed under her windshield wiper, along with a note that simply read, "You don't owe me gratitude, but I owed him grace. It wasn't a fortune. Just enough for her to finish grad school if she wanted. Enough to remind her that love, even bruised and doubted, doesn't always choose spite. I don't know if she cashed it. I don't need to. Sometimes the point isn't whether they take the kindness, but whether you can still offer it, knowing full well they may not. And that's where I leave it, really. I'm not trying to inspire pity. I don't want to be remembered as the woman he left a box for. If anything, I hope I'm remembered for what I did next. I kept living. I smiled at strangers. I fed the birds on the balcony. I joined a reading club where no one asked what my last name used to be. I laughed at terrible movies with my son on Sunday nights. And when the closing credits rolled, I didn't think about what I'd lost. I thought about what I still had. That's healing. Not a grand declaration, not a courtroom victory, not even the mic drop moment that makes the room gasp. Healing is in the quiet, in letting your hands rest easy again, in knowing you have nothing left to prove. So, if you're listening to this, and you've ever been erased, sidelined, made to feel like you were just a nurse, a second wife, a placeholder until someone else arrived, let me say this. You are not the background to someone else's spotlight. You matter. Not because someone says it or writes it in a will or announces it in a eulogy, but because your story didn't end when they wanted it to. It's still being written, right here, right now. And I hope, truly, I hope, you keep writing it. With lavender, with laughter, with grace, and maybe, just maybe, with a little more room to breathe. If this story found a corner of your heart, I hope you'll share it. Maybe someone you love needs to hear it too. Drop a comment if you've ever stood in silence for someone who deserved to be seen. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories that matter, feel free to subscribe. We tell them here, quietly, boldly, like life.